Chapter 6. Chuck. My stepfather Chuck was the biggest male influence in my life. He met Mom through Aunt Betty when they were teenagers. Mostly Cherokee, he was a smaller but athletic young man with a Michael Landon, Robert Conrad type of physique and athleticism. His moving in with us was a seamless transition as he had only brought his clothes. He always wanted to try something new. We went to a local pet store and took the measurements of a 150-gallon tank. Chuck cut the glass himself, and I was fascinated by the process. He etched a line on the surface of a half-inch thick pane of glass with a tool that looked like an overused miniature pizza cutter. I remember watching him and thinking, it's going to take him a week if he thinks he can cut it with that little wheel. It's just making a little crunching noise. That's not going to work. He then tapped along the etched line with a small metal ball on the end of the tool handle. What's he doing now? Must be some kind of superstitious ritual, because I don't see it making any difference. Imagine my surprise when the unwanted glass section fell off into his hand like a skinny edge of a glacier on a hot day. The silicone caulking we used to assemble the aquarium only came in black, as opposed to the clear silicone of today. The heavy pieces of glass were tricky to hold in place and caulk. At 7 years old, I was essentially a human clamp. Then came the fun part, stocking the aquarium. Lake Osborne and other canals were the most frequented hunting grounds. Paradise fish and flagfish were some of the more valued catches, with the sailfin molly being the most desired capture. The male sailfin has a long, shimmery gold top fin and body with a blue tail highlights. It was shiny enough to be seen through the coffee-colored fresh water of the lake and its connected waterways. Chuck later began integrating store-purchased creatures into the tank. Before long, there was such a cross-section of underwater life swimming around that it looked like a view from Noah's submarine. Fancy guppies, crayfish, which were quickly removed after witnessing its appetite for fancy guppies, gouramis, you name it. If they had one at a pet store or lived in the wild, we had one in the aquarium at one point in time. Then came the great saltwater aquarium experiment. There was no synthetic process to create a successful saltwater environment in an aquarium at the time, so Chuck bought 2 55-gallon plastic garbage cans to each transport approximately 25 gallons of water at a time from the Lake Worth Beach shore. We dragged the cans up to the beach parking lot and hoisted them into the bed of a small Japanese pickup truck Chuck had borrowed from a friend. It was just after sunrise, the beaches were empty and the traffic ultra-light. This aided us in our attempt to drive at a gradual controlled speed and slow-motion turning to minimize sloshing and loss of precious seawater. We repeated this process 6 times. Catching fish in saltwater was a lot harder than netting freshwater fish from the shore. We had to swim for them. Our hunting time limited to how long we could hold our breath before resurfacing to forcefully blow water out of our snorkels, grab a few lung-replenishing breaths, and pick our next diving point. I soon realized that I was better at netting seaweed and searching through it for small creatures, a tactic successful in tropical fish hunting as well. We then had to transfer the creatures into a container and get them home in the aquarium. The intense maintenance needed to maintain a healthy saltwater ecosystem influenced his decision to return to keeping tropical fish. Chuck once built a telescope from scratch, a direct reflective type with a 7-inch hand-ground concave mirror at the bottom of a 7-foot-long tube, made from stock aluminum awning material. I watched him go through the entire process. He melted down lead fishing sinkers on the stove to create the different weights needed to apply the proper pressure for each graduated fineness of grit to be used to grind a precise depression in a 7-inch circular lens. This was necessary to reflect the properly miniaturized image to the eyepiece mounted on the side near the top of the tube. I was amazed at the visual uniformity attained when he applied the mirroring substance onto the lens surface. Chuck had painted the inside of the tube a deep, flat black, and it stood assembled, waiting the mounting and alignment of the finished mirrored lens. We took turns standing on a stepladder to look into the eyepiece. The epic moment for me came the night I saw Saturn. Everything was black and white and slightly blown out brightness-wise. I was able to see a dark space between the planet and a small section of the rings. They were cocked at a 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock angle. I felt as if I were looking out of the portal of a spaceship, the first human to get this close. The universe shrank a little for me that night. Chuck got a job working for the Lake Worth Parks Department Maintenance Division. His first assignment was maintaining the Pony League baseball fields at 22nd and A Street in North Lake Worth. That was the first time I had seen an official ball field. It had clay base paths, dugouts, even a pitching rubber. I remember the first time I stood on a mound, I thought, whose idea was this to have a pile of dirt in the middle of the field? The mechanics of pitching, the visual dialogue with the catcher, and the base runner watching is enough to have to concentrate on, and now I have to keep my balance on a hill? I had always played on the simple softball fields of South Grade Playground. The base paths were designated by the trail created by previous base runners. It was smart not to use clay, as no organized games were played there. The parents benefited from the lack of clay as well, for grade schoolers are clumsy, and we would be a school of clay-stained clothes wearers. Chuck would bring me home baseballs, bats, and ball gloves that were abandoned or thrown away. What a treasure trove for a boy and his schoolyard friends. We could only play softball at the schoolyard, though, because many of us were able to hit the cafeteria and its windows if using a baseball. Chuck was promoted to maintaining Bryant Park, a waterside facility located at the west end of the Lake Worth Bridge. It had an outdoor band shell stage area, boat docking ramps, children's playground, picnic pavilion, and plenty of waterside fishing area along the seawall. Semi-tamed squirrels inhabited the various cabbage and coconut palms that populated the picnic table facility. It was a great place to take a break from walking back home after a physically taxing day at the beach or fishing at the pier. He was responsible for that area between the boat ramps and Lucerne Avenue. He plugged in hoses and watered the grass where the sprinklers couldn't reach, cleaned and stocked the bathrooms, etc. He did that for about 10 years, until he was promoted to head of the Parks Department. There was an old band shell in place before the current upgraded band shell facility was built. The half dome of the old band shell appeared to have the structural consistency and integrity of a well-built fiberglass-coated antique papier-mâché project. Chuck shared the old band shell with a gang of intercoastal rats who resembled buff mini kangaroos who were too badass to hop. They lived in the inner areas of the structure not accessible to man, which was a 5-foot-tall enclosed space below the stage itself. This area ran under the entire stage, which was plenty of room for a fish-eating rat community. Unfortunately, that was the only area to flood when it rained strongly or steadily. The tilted audience area funneled all its collected rainwater downhill to collect in Rat Town, the area directly below the stage. These rats were so big and confident that they would blatantly come into Chuck's custodial office in the back of the band shell to get away from the flooding, having no fear of Chuck. I remember him coming home early on those days. The Florida JCs used to hold a yearly shark tournament at Bryant Park, setting up a crane to display and weigh the sharks brought in by the boats returning from the ocean. It felt like the shark tournament was in my own backyard with Chuck maintaining Bryant Park. It was always bustling with activity that weekend, boats going out, boats coming in, crowds gathering in anticipation as they unloaded their catch, with others gathered to examine what was on display. No one gave it a second thought that these submarines with teeth were caught in the very waters that they swam in. I was oblivious as well, as I was used to seeing sizable fish at boat docks and fishing venues. The Lake Worth Pier and the various charter and drift boat moorings around Palm Beach County had provided a look at the larger fish that this greenhorn hadn't caught or even seen caught yet. It was always special to be at Donnie's tackle when an angler would drop by to document and show off his special catch. I didn't give the idea of swimming with these creatures a second thought until I ran across a copy of the novel Jaws. My familiarity of the ocean and the fish at the time intensified the described scenarios, as details described by the written word can be more revealing than an actual visual. I felt a little queasy when reading of the first attack. That was all anyone would have to read to fuel their apprehensive imagination. I could hear the author's narration of the attacks as I walked towards the beach. It didn't help that many shark-sized flat rock formations were scattered among the shallow waters of Lake Worth Beach, the water's diffraction of the sunlight giving these stone sharks the illusion of movement, spawning numerous mini-strokes for me. I'm surprised there wasn't a feeding frenzy around me, as I felt every pore emitting flop sweat whenever my peripheral vision spotted a vicious phantom fish coming for me. Jaws, the movie, came out shortly afterwards and replaced the horrifying scenes painted in my imagination by the book with the animatronic shark attack visuals. Ironically, I felt the same queasiness in both the book version and the movie version of the first attack, the woman swimming at night. It was a scene that forced you to fill in the visuals of what was happening under the water's surface. I recognized exactly what was happening as my memory involuntarily reread the attack as it occurred on the screen. I knew her leg was gone after that first violent tug. I believe they stopped having the shark tourney shortly after the movie's release. I seem to recall hearing the justification being that the increase of shark fishing and chumming just offshore was attracting sharks to the swimming area of the beach, the same reason shark fishing isn't allowed on the pier. Another exciting event to attend was the Lake Worth 4th of July fireworks. They were launched from the mini peninsula 50 yards south of the boat ramps. We tried fishing there a couple times, but encountered a hook-snagging rocky terrain in the surrounding shallows. You could fish there, but you would have to reel your line in quickly enough to keep the hook and sinker above the final 50 feet of treacherous area. I suspected that concrete rubble had been used to shore up the jetty, creating the potential hook hazard areas. The 4th of July was a pleasant day at the park. Live music, food vendors, performance artists, and other pleasant distractions were scattered amongst the roaming crowd. Everything came to a head as the sun sank in the west. All eyes were on the man-made jetty jutting out into the waterway, just south of the boat docks. We were waiting to see the lighting torch activated. These were the first fireworks I had ever seen. The symmetry of the circles and the patterns had the biggest impact on me. My favorite sound was the sparkling residual noises of some of the more elaborate rounds. It sounded like God took a long, slow bite of some Rice Krispies next to the biggest microphone in the world. The visual and musical choreography of their fireworks sequence was on point psychologically, with the frequency of the launching and the explosive complexity increasing gradually. The occasional cannon fire percussion type of blast broke up the smooth motion of the other fireworks. The fireworks display was brought to an end with an impressive sky-filled finale lasting long enough to make a young kid dizzy from forgetting to take a breath. One year, the exhilaration of the fireworks was overshadowed by the pure joy of the next morning. Chuck, Mom, and I had ended up in the area between the bandshell and Fifth Avenue Park when the fireworks started. I marveled at how dark this part of the park was at night. I examined the different types of spent fireworks I discovered on the ground and found that a few were still good. This gave me an idea. I would come early the next morning and see if I could find a couple more. I got up at the crack of dawn, jumped on my bike, and flew down Lakeside Drive, 4 blocks to 5th Avenue South. I hung a right at the Birthday Cake Castle, a house of unique architecture. Its cylinder-shaped stacked section and cone-shaped roof gave it its name. The property was always tastefully decorated during the Christmas season. I noticed the fog still rising from the grass of the waterside park, known as Fifth Avenue Park. I rode my bike directly to the epicenter of it, coming to a stop next to the cabbage palm that was also home plate when we played softball there in the summer. I had my medium-sized paper bag ready and began my explosive scavenger hunt. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was like a well-populated Easter egg hunt, and I was the only participant. Packs of Black Cat firecrackers, bottle rockets, smoke bombs, specialty fireworks, cherry bombs. They were all there for me to harvest. My bag was practically full by the time I reached the north end of the mid-park area. I noticed that the less fruitful areas were the ones that were well lit that night. I picked up my bag full of treasure and one-arm steered all the way home on my Stingray-styled bicycle, imagining the fun I was going to have setting all these off. Being a braggart is not a good thing, but I believe One particular boast is the reason why I still have all my fingers. I proudly show Mom my grocery bag of gunpowder. She took it from me on the spot, placing it on top of the fridge, giving me a lingering glare that silently dared me to mess with it. The lion's share of who I am is because of my 8 years with Chuck Allen. I have searched for him for years, but came up empty. He will live forever in some of my fondest memories.